Okay, so let's unpack this. It is Monday, March 2nd, 2026. And if you are listening to this right now, chances are you spent the entire weekend just glued to your phone.
Oh, absolutely.
Or, maybe even trying to avoid the news entirely because it feels like the world just tilted on its axis. But the reality is, the world looks very, very different today than it did on Friday morning. We are currently, well, about 57 hours into what the Pentagon has officially dubbed Operation Epic Fury.
Right. 57 hours into a massive multi-domain military campaign against Iran.
Yeah.
And I think campaign is really the only right word here, because this isn't a skirmish. This isn't a proportional response strike like we've seen in the past.
No, definitely not.
The scale of this is, honestly, it's hard to wrap your head around just from reading the scrolling tickers on cable news.
Exactly. And that is exactly why we are doing this deep dive today. We aren't here to speculate on what might happen next week, and we aren't here to just, read headlines to you. We have something much better. We have a transcript.
A very specific, very dense transcript.
Yes, of a press briefing that just happened at the Pentagon.
And this is the primary source material we're working with today. It features the Secretary of Defense Secretary Hegseth and General Kane, who is the Director of Operations. And their briefing gives us the official ground truth of what has actually happened over the last 2.5 days. It's the Pentagon's own after-action report, but delivered while the action is literally still happening.
Right. And the mission for this deep dive is pretty clear. We want to move past the initial shock of the breaking news and really understand the mechanics. We want to understand the strategy. We want to get into the specific military hardware and the doctrine that is driving this. Because the Pentagon is calling this the most precise aerial operation in history.
Which is a massive claim.
It's huge.
But when you look at the details they provided, the sheer number of moving parts, the synchronization of cyberspace, air, and sea is staggering. It's a level of complexity that we just haven't seen since maybe the opening of Desert Storm, but with technology that makes 1991 look like the Stone Age.
Yeah, and there is a huge tonal shift here, right? I mean, think about the last 20 years of how the U.S. has talked about conflict in the Middle East.
Cautious.
Right. It's usually cautious, it's usually apologetic, but this feels completely different.
It is radically different. The language used in this briefing is incredibly specific. It's unapologetic. It is aggressive. And there is a core tension that we really need to explore right off the bat. The administration is insisting repeatedly that this is not a regime change war.
Right. They keep saying, we aren't doing nation building. They're almost allergic to that phrase.
Exactly. But at the exact same time, the secretary confirms in this very briefing that the regime has fundamentally changed. And they drop a massive piece of information regarding the Ayatollah. So you have this paradox where they're saying, we aren't here to change the government, but the head of the government is gone and the government is collapsing.
Which we will get to because that is a huge part of the story, especially the Israeli component. But I want to start with the why, the Cassie's belly. Because usually when a war starts, there's a single event, a Franz Ferdinand moment, a specific attack that triggers the response. But the secretary frames this entirely differently.
He does, and this is really important for understanding the mindset of this administration. He explicitly frames this not as the start of a new war, but as the end of a 47-year war.
The 47 years narrative, let's dig into that. Why 47 years specifically?
He's taking us back to 1979.
The Iranian Revolution.
Right, the revolution, the hostage crisis at the embassy in Tehran. The argument the secretary is making, and it's a fascinating rhetorical shift, is that the United States hasn't started a war this week. He's arguing that the U.S. has finally decided to join a war that Iran has been waging unilaterally against America for nearly half a century.
That changes the moral calculus completely, doesn't it? If you frame it as they've been punching us for 47 years and we finally punched back, it stops being seen as an aggression and becomes a delayed defense.
Exactly. And he brought receipts. He didn't just stand up there and say terrorism in a vague sense. He listed a very specific timeline of grievances. He talks about the Marine barracks bombing in Beirut in 1983. He talks about the Khobar Towers bombing. He talks about the murders at embassies.
And he brought up the IEDs in Iraq and Afghanistan, too. That really seemed to be a focal point, the idea that Iranian proxies killed thousands of American soldiers over the last 2 decades.
It's highly personal for this leadership. You can hear it in the transcript.
Yeah.
You have to remember, the people running the Pentagon, now Secretary Hegseth, General Kane, these are global war on terror veterans. They aren't looking at this like Kissinger playing chess on a map. They're looking at this as guys who lost friends to Iranian proxies in Sadr City or Kandahar.
So when he mentions brothers who never came home, that's not just a speechwriter's line.
No, that is the doctrine. The secretary explicitly mentions that his generation of veterans carries the names of brothers who never came home because of Iranian-backed militias using EFPs.
Explosively formed penetrators.
Right, those copper-tipped IEDs that could just melt through an armored Humvee like butter.
Yeah.
So the justification here is heavily retributive. It's framed as America first. The argument they're putting forward is that peace through strength requires actually finishing the conflicts, not just managing it year after year.
And there was a specific trigger mentioned, right? It wasn't just that they woke up and said, we're tired of waiting.
The briefing does allude to a trigger event, though they keep the specific operational details of that trigger classified. They don't say, on Thursday at 2 p.m. this specific thing happened, but the secretary uses a very powerful metaphor to explain the strategic timing of why this had to happen now. He says Iran had a conventional gun to our head.
While lying about their nuclear ambitions.
Precisely. And this is where we get into the real strategic meat of the briefing, this concept of a conventional shield for nuclear blackmail.
Okay, let's slow down and really dig into that. Because that sounds like textbook military jargon conventional shield for nuclear blackmail. But it feels like the absolute key to understanding why this happened right now. Break that down for me.
So typically, we think of nuclear weapons as the ultimate shield, right? You get a nuke and nobody invades you. That's North Korea's strategy.
Yeah.
That's mutually assured destruction. Don't touch me or we both melt.
Right. It's the ultimate insurance policy for a regime.
But the secretary is arguing that Iran flipped the script. They didn't have the nuke yet. They were close. They were digging tunnels deep into mountains, but they weren't quite there. So what do you do while you're vulnerable? You build a conventional shield.
Okay.
You build thousands of ballistic missiles. You build those one-way attack drones, the Shaheds we've seen used extensively in Ukraine. You build a fast attack navy that can mine the Strait of Hormuz and crash the global economy in an afternoon.
Basically stuff that goes boom but isn't nuclear.
Right. But they were building this massive conventional force to hold the world hostage right now, to threaten U.S. bases, to threaten global shipping lanes, to threaten regional allies. The idea was to create a shield of conventional terror where they could say, if you touch our nuclear program, we will rain fire on Tel Aviv and Dubai. And that threat would make the U.S. too afraid to strike them.
So the conventional weapons are the gun they point at your head while they quietly build the bomb in the basement.
That is the perfect analogy. The Pentagon's assessment was that Iran was using this massive conventional army to say to the U.S., back off. And that fear, that hesitation from the West, is what allowed them to keep digging those tunnels.
Until Friday.
Until Friday. The core logic of Operation Epic Fury is we have to smash the conventional gun. We have to take away their ability to hurt us conventionally so that they can no longer blackmail us while they finish the nuclear project. It's about entirely stripping away their leverage. The secretary was very clear on this. He said, peaceful nuclear ambitions do not need to be buried underneath mountains.
That is a chilling line. And they mentioned a previous operation in the transcript, too. Something called Operation Midnight Hammer.
Yes, this is fascinating backstory that we didn't fully know about. Apparently, last June, there was a U.S. operation called Midnight Hammer that, in the exact words of the secretary, obliterated Iran's nuclear program to rubble.
So they already hit them once.
They did. And the administration's narrative here is that after Midnight Hammer, the U.S. basically said, okay, that's it. We broke your toy. Now come to the table and make a deal. They claim that Secretary Rubio, Steve Witko, and Jared Kushner offered pathway after pathway to peace.
But Iran didn't take it.
According to the briefing, no. They used the diplomacy to stall. They just wanted to reload that conventional shield and restart the nuclear program underground. So the administration decided that the conventional gun had to be taken away entirely.
Which brings us to Friday, February 27th. The timeline here is just wild.
It is incredibly compressed. The preparation really kicked into high gear on February 28th, when the full strength of the U.S. Armed Forces integrated. But the actual go order came specifically on Friday, February 27th at 15:38 Eastern Standard Time.
3:38 p.m., a Friday afternoon. Picture this. People are leaving work. They're getting ready for the weekend, sitting in traffic.
And the president is signing the order. The president's exact order was quoted directly in the transcript. Operation Epic Fury is approved. No aborts. Good luck.
No aborts. That's definitive.
It signals a point of absolute no return. It means once the planes are up, they aren't turning back for a phone call or a sudden diplomatic breakthrough. And then we hit H-hour, Saturday, February 28th at 01:15 Eastern. That's 9:45 a.m. in Tehran.
Wait, 9:45 a.m. In the morning. Isn't that
Um,
unusual? I feel like we always hear about airstrikes happening in the dead of night, the sky lit up with tracer fire, that sort of thing. Everything I've ever seen about modern war says you bomb at night. The night vision is green, the tracers look cool, why in broad daylight?
It is highly unusual for the opening salvo of a major campaign. Usually, you absolutely want the cover of darkness. But General Kane explained this. It was a daylight strike launched to coincide with that trigger event we mentioned earlier. But more importantly, it emphasizes the sheer element of surprise. When everyone expects you to hit at night, hitting right after breakfast is a massive shock to the system.
Shock value.
Exactly. General Kane implied it's about shooting the archer while he's having breakfast. When you strike at night, the enemy is somewhat prepared. Shifts are changing, guards are alert, they're watching the scopes. At 9:45 a.m. on a Saturday, traffic is moving, people are at their desks. It maximizes the psychological impact of saying, we can get you absolutely anytime we want.
But isn't a B-2 bomber or an F-35 visible in daylight? I mean, stealth makes you invisible to radar, not invisible to human eyes. How do you pull off a daylight raid without getting shot down immediately by someone just looking up?
You blind them first. This is phase one of the operation. Before a single missile hit a physical target, U.S. Cyber Command and U.S. Space Command were already at work.
The first movers. The transcript mentions them briefly, but I feel like we really need to unpack what that actually means. Are we talking about hacking government websites?
No, we are talking about military-grade electronic warfare. This is way beyond defacing a website or shutting down a router.
Yeah.
We're talking about non-kinetic effects.
And non-kinetic just means stuff that doesn't explode, right?
Right. But just because it doesn't explode doesn't mean it isn't completely destructive. Imagine being an Iranian radar operator. Your entire job is to watch a screen for blips. Suddenly your screen doesn't just go black, because that would be suspicious. You'd sound the alarm. Maybe it shows you 1,000 blips that aren't actually there. Or maybe it shows you a perfectly clear blue sky while 100 planes are flying right at you.
Oh, wow. So they are actively gaslighting the sensors.
Exactly. They use cyber warfare and space-based assets to disrupt communications, jam radars, and essentially dazzle and confuse the Iranian command and control. General Khan used that exact voice, dazzle and confuse. So the Iranian generals are picking up landlines that don't work, looking at radar screens that are lying to them, and trying to issue orders over radio frequencies that are just pure static.
And while they're blinking and trying to figure out why their billion-dollar defense systems are going haywire, the kinetic wave arrives. Phase 2.
And what a wave it was. The briefing says over 100 aircraft launched simultaneously.
From land and sea.
It was a synchronized global strike. We're talking about F-35s, fighters, drones, and Tomahawk cruise missiles launching from the Navy ships in the region. But the absolute standout asset mentioned has to be the D-2 bombers.
The stealth bombers. The big flying wings.
Yes. General Kane noted that these D-2s flew 37-hour round trips from the continental United States.
37 hours. You're saying they flew from Missouri or wherever they are based, all the way to Iran, dropped their payload, and flew all the way back without stopping.
From Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, yes.
Yeah.
Non-stop.
I really want everyone listening to pause and think about that. 37 hours, I get cranky if I'm on a commercial flight to London for 7 hours in economy. How is that physically possible for a pilot?
It's brutal. You're strapped into an ejection seat. You can't really stand up and walk around. You're taking shifts, napping in a tiny cot in the cockpit while the other guy flies. But the logistics behind the scenes making that flight possible are even crazier.
Because they need gas. A lot of gas.
Right, it requires a massive tanker bridge. You have aerial refueling tankers staged over the Atlantic, over Europe, over the Mediterranean. It's a highly choreographed ballet. If one tanker is 10 minutes late or has a mechanical issue and can't deploy the boom, the bomber runs dry and falls into the ocean.
And they did this with multiple bombers simultaneously.
Seamlessly. And this sends a strategic message way bigger than just, we bombed Iran. It tells China, tells Russia, we don't need a base near your border to touch you.
We can hit you from home plate.
We can hit you from home plate. That is a terrifying capability that really only the U.S. possesses at that kind of scale.
And the targets. They hit over 1,000 targets in the first 24 hours alone. That sounds like a lot of things blowing up very quickly.
It's a saturation attack. They went after command and control centers, the naval forces at port, the ballistic missile launch sites, and the intelligence infrastructure. The goal was to establish local air superiority immediately.
Which basically means the U.S. owns the sky.
Over the southern flank of Iran, yes. By destroying the air defenses and the radars in that first wave while the cyber attacks were blinding them, U.S. forces could then operate freely to just hunt down the rest of the targets on their list without fear of being shot down.
Okay, so that's the U.S. side of things. But there was a moment in the Q&A section of the briefing that I think stopped everyone in their tracks. We have to talk about the silent partner. Or, I guess, not so silent partner now.
You're talking about the Israeli component.
Yes. The reporter's question about the Ayatollah.
It was a bombshell reveal, and it was delivered almost casually. A reporter asked about the strike that killed the Ayatollah. And the secretary didn't dodge it. He didn't say, we can neither confirm nor deny the reports. He just acknowledged it.
He actually said, I think Israel did a great job.
Right. Which confirms two things immediately. One, the Ayatollah is dead. Two, it was a specific Israeli operation that did it. But the way the secretary framed this is crucial for understanding the coalition dynamics here.
Yeah.
He praised the operation, but he was very careful to frame it as a partnership where Israel has its own clear missions.
So it wasn't a U.S. pilot pulling the trigger on that specific strike, but it was clearly part of the same broader symphony of destruction.
General Kane mentioned that the Israeli Defense Forces executed hundreds of sorties. And sorties just means combat missions flown by a single aircraft. Hundreds of them. They were separate from the U.S. Air Tasking Order, but they were highly coordinated.
So they aren't crashing into each other in the airspace, but they're hitting completely different lists of targets.
Exactly. It implies a level of integration between the U.S. and Israel that is genuinely unprecedented. Usually the U.S. says, we are doing this, you stay out of the way so things don't get messy. Here, they were flying wing to wing effectively.
And it wasn't just Israel, right? Because the briefing went out of its way to shout out some other regional partners, and not just the usual suspects like the UK or France.
No, this was highly significant. They mentioned air defense batteries in Qatar, the UAE, Kuwait, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia.
And they explicitly said these countries joined the fight.
That is a massive diplomatic shift. Historically, Arab nations have been very hesitant to be seen publicly aiding a strike on another Muslim nation, even a regional rival like Iran. They worry about the backlash from their own populations. But the secretary called this proof of earned trust. It implies that these nations were actively using their air defense systems to intercept Iranian missiles headed for U.S. targets or elsewhere.
That is a united front that we just haven't really seen before in the region. It's almost like an impromptu NATO for the Middle East stood up overnight.
And we really shouldn't overlook the logistics of this coalition either. We always focus on the fighter jets and the explosions, but General Kane made a point to thank the unsung heroes, the logisticians.
The people moving the fuel and the ammo.
Wars are won on logistics. There's an old saying, amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics. He specifically shouted out the National Guard, the Wisconsin Army National Guard, and the Vermont Air National Guard.
I love that detail in the transcript. The Vermont Air National Guard, the Green Mountain Boys, flying F-35s.
It's such a great example of the total force concept in the military. These aren't just full-time active-duty soldiers living on a base in Fort Liberty. These are people who might be teachers, police officers, or commercial airline pilots in their normal civilian lives. And suddenly, they are in the cockpit of the most advanced fighter jet in the world, flying over hostile territory.
And apparently, they were supposed to go home.
Right? They were mobilized for a completely different mission, probably nearing the end of a deployment somewhere else, getting ready to see their families. But then they were tasked to deploy across the Atlantic for this operation instead. It shows how the U.S. military can surge capacity by tapping into the reserve and guard components. It really humanizes the massive machine.
So we have the U.S., Israel, and a coalition of Arab states all engaging, but obviously, Iran didn't just sit there and take it. They fired back.
They did. And this leads us to the defensive side of the equation. Iran launched hundreds of ballistic missiles and what the Pentagon calls one-way attack UAVs.
Basically kamikaze drones.
It's essentially yes. And the U.S. response relied entirely on the defensive umbrella. The Patriot missile batteries, the TA systems, and the Navy destroyers equipped with Aegis radar systems.
General Kane seemed pretty confident in the defense during the briefing. He said they intercepted the vast majority.
He did. He described the operation centers as steady, frosty, calm. But he also introduced a strategic concept during this part of the briefing called shooting the archer.
Shooting the archer, I really like that image. What does it actually mean in practice?
It means you don't just want to shoot down the arrow, the incoming missile in the air. That's a losing game eventually because arrows are cheap. Iranian missiles are way cheaper than the multi-million-dollar interceptors the U.S. uses to stop them. You want to kill the archer, the launch site, the radar dish, the operator on the ground so they can't shoot another arrow again. That is the primary goal of the U.S. offensive. destroy the conventional umbrella so the threats literally stop coming.
But no defense is perfect. You can't catch every single arrow, and the briefing was very upfront about the cost of this.
War is hell. That was the phrase the secretary used repeatedly. They confirmed that 4 Americans have been killed and several injured.
And they gave some detail on how that happened. The squirter incident, which is a terrible term, by the way.
It is, but it's the harsh military reality.
Mhm.
Squirter is a missile that leaks through the defensive net. You intercept 99%, but one manages to get through. Or, and this is important physics to understand, you do intercept it, but physics doesn't just stop.
What do you mean by that?
If a ballistic missile is coming in at Mach 5 and you hit it with a Patriot interceptor, it doesn't just vanish into fairy dust. It breaks apart. But all that metal, the remaining fuel, the warhead fragments, it's all still traveling at thousands of miles an hour along the exact same trajectory. It basically turns into a massive shotgun blast of burning debris falling from the sky.
So even a successful intercept can be deadly to the people below.
Exactly. In this specific case, the missile or the resulting debris hit a tactical operations center.
A TOC. That is a fortified building, right?
It is. But ballistic missiles carry a massive amount of kinetic energy. Even a fortified bunker or a reinforced building can be devastated by a direct hit or a massive debris field. It's a tragic reminder that technology can mitigate risk, but it can never completely eliminate it in a war zone.
And there was also mention of lost aircraft. 3 F-15Es went down.
This is a crucial detail to clarify from the transcript, because in the fog of war, people hear 3 jets down and immediately assume they were shot down by Iranian anti-air fire. The general stated clearly that these 3 aircraft were lost due to non-hostile causes, accidents, or mechanical failures.
Which happens when you're flying hundreds of sorties at high speed.
High tempo, high stress, incredibly complex machinery. Things break. Pilots make errors when they are exhausted. It highlights the inherent danger of these operations even without an enemy firing back. But the Secretary's reaction to these overall losses was striking. He absolutely refused to apologize for the scope or the aggressiveness of the operation. He said the best way to honor the fallen is to finish the mission with epic fury.
Epic fury. That phrase again. It's not just the name of the operation, it's the entire mindset.
It is the doctrine of this administration.
So, speaking of doctrine, let's talk about the end game here. What does winning actually look like in this scenario? Because they were very clear about what it doesn't look like.
They were adamant on this point. This is not Iraq 2.0. The Secretary listed the specific objectives very clearly. 1, destroy Iranian offensive missiles and production capabilities. 2, destroy the Iranian Navy. 3, ensure no nuclear weapons, peaceful or otherwise.
And that is it. No building democracy, no winning hearts and minds in the traditional sense we're used to hearing.
The exact phrase used was, no democracy-building exercise. They are explicitly rejecting the last 20 years of U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. The America First doctrine here is defined by them as no stupid rules of engagement, no politically correct wars, we fight to win, and don't waste time.
It is a purely transactional, completely destructive objective. Break the toys, break the ability to hurt us, and then what? Just leave.
That is the big question right now, the exit strategy. A reporter specifically asked about a rumor regarding a 4-week timeline for the operation.
And the Secretary shut that down hard.
He called it a media game. He refused to give a date on the calendar. He said the criterion for leaving is when the objectives are met.
We leave when the job is done.
Which is classic military logic, but in a conflict this geographically large and complex, done can be a moving target. However, he did emphasize that they are effectively 57 hours in, and because the fight is so active, the battle damage assessment, or BDA, is slower than usual.
Because they are doing offense and assessment simultaneously.
Right. Usually you bomb a target, you send a drone to take a picture of it, you count the craters, and then you sit down and decide if you need to restrike it tomorrow. Here, they aren't pausing to count the craters. They are bombing, checking if it blew up while flying right past it, and instantly moving to bomb the next thing. It's a continuous rolling thunder.
There was also a message directed at the Iranian people in the briefing, and this felt, well, it felt like a direct call to action.
The president's message was quoted as, "Now is your time."
That is heavy.
It is. The administration is making a very deliberate distinction between the regime, which they call a death cult, and the Iranian people themselves. They are hoping that by degrading the security forces, the IRGC, the Basij, the guys on motorcycles with batons who beat protesters in the streets, the Iranian people will take advantage of the vacuum.
So they aren't sending U.S. troops to change the regime, but they are bombing the regime's guards into dust so the people can change it themselves.
That seems to be the unspoken political strategy here. Create the absolute conditions for collapse, but explicitly don't own the rebuilding process.
We've covered a lot of ground here, the timeline, the incredible tech, the regional coalition, the casualties, but I really want to circle back to something the general said about the joint force, because he sounded incredibly proud of how this was executed.
He did. General Keane spent a lot of time praising the integration of all the branches. He listed the commanders Admiral Cooper at Naval Central Command, Lieutenant General Frank at Army Central, Lieutenant General France at Air Force Central. He wanted to emphasize to the press that this wasn't just the Air Force doing a thing while the Navy sat back and watched. It was the Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, Space Force, and Coast Guard all working seamlessly as one machine.
We are the best in the world at integrating. Period. That was the quote.
And in modern warfare, integration is lethality. If your space satellite can talk to your Navy ship, which can talk to your bomber, which can talk to your cyber hacker at a desk in Maryland, you move faster than the enemy can even think. You are permanently inside their decision cycle.
And that seems to be the entire story of the first 57 hours. Speed, surprise, and sheer violence of action.
Precisely.
So bringing it back to you, listening to this, what does this all mean? Why does this matter beyond the scary headlines on your phone?
It matters because it represents a fundamental historic shift in how the world's superpower engages with its adversaries. For decades, the strategy was containment, proportional response, fighting proxy wars in the shadows. This operation says, if you threaten us with a gun, we will destroy the gun and the hand holding it, and we absolutely won't apologize for it.
It sets a completely new precedent.
It does. It signals to every other adversary on the globe, whether that is in the Pacific or Eastern Europe, that the rules of engagement have changed. The restraint that perhaps defined previous eras of American foreign policy is gone.
And there is a final provocative thought I want to leave everyone with before we go. We talked about the Ayatollah being dead. The source material confirms the regime sure did change.
Right.
But the U.S. explicitly refuses to do nation building. So if you decapitate the leadership, completely destroy the military, and then just walk away, what happens to the vacuum?
That is the historical trap, isn't it? Look at Libya. Look at Iraq after the initial invasion.
Exactly. We are looking at a scenario where the U.S. might win the war decisively in a matter of days. But by refusing to participate in winning the peace, who actually fills that void? Is it a democracy rising from the people? Is it rival warlords? Is it total anarchy?
Or perhaps another global power steps in to secure the region.
History tells us that power vacuums rarely stay empty for very long, and usually what fills them is chaotic.
It's a really sobering thought. The military Operation Epic Fury is undeniably precise. It's a masterpiece of military planning. But the geopolitical aftermath? That might be very, very messy.
We will have to wait and see. We will likely be back with another update as the situation develops because, as I said, the BDA is still coming in.
There's a lot more to learn in the coming days.
But for now, that is the state of play on Monday, March 2nd, 2026. This has been The Deep Dive. Thanks for listening.
Stay safe out there.